Welcome to the National Soccer Coaches Association of America Winter Webinar Series. My name is David Newberry, and I'm the coordinator of the NSCAA Club Standards Project, an initiative designed to raise the performance of coaches and players one club at a time. We currently have 330 club participants representing 215,000 players and 19,500 coaches registered as part of the project. The NSCAA is delighted to welcome Tim Bauman, the VP of Sales and Marketing for Curio, to present today's topic, Automation Tools to Streamline Club Administration. Curio has been an excellent addition to our efforts to raise the performance of youth soccer clubs. Tim and his team are providing unconditional advice, guidance, and support to organizations participating in the project, with the primary focus on helping organizations critically examine the approach to branding, communications, and to improve systems and processes. Tim is extremely well qualified to present today's topic, focusing on automation tools. In his professional life, Tim has held leadership positions with several prominent organizations, including management positions with Ericsson and Oracle Corporation, to name just a couple. In his sporting life, Tim has served as the director of the United States Professional Triathlon Team, founded and served as the president of the Dallas Youth Basketball Association, and was a sports commentator for ABC News affiliate in northeastern Pennsylvania. His connections to youth soccer are strong, and he is currently the president of Eastside Football Club, a premier soccer club in the Seattle area. And Tim, thanks very much for joining us, and welcome.
Well, thanks everyone, and certainly my thanks to David and to the NSCAA Club Standards Project, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for joining. We're going to really try and walk you quickly through a lot of the things that underpinned founding Curio, but most importantly, we want to talk to you just about how all of the work that we have done in our professional lives concerning building IT products and or building IT systems integration projects, connects us to the world of soccer and the top tech, which we actually call soccernology. Two things to note that are particularly important is we spent a lot of time looking at youth sports and the whole idea of how you automate the running of a club from a workflow perspective. And most of the work that we've done as professionals has given us the opportunity to think about a flow of work. And most of the things that we do in our normal course of life is driven on some sense of workflow, the processing of a credit card, the buying of a car, the running of a manufacturing facility. They all are based on workflow and the processes that underpin that workflow, and then certainly the use of modern technology. And the thing that was most unique to all of us as the people at Curio were the fact that while we have professional backgrounds and have had success and experience in information technology, either on the product side or the integration side, the thing that connected us all in common was we have kids who play youth sports, and as you might expect, like all of us probably, we involve ourselves in the life of our kids. So from our investors to all of our employees, the common bond was kids playing youth soccer, as you can see in this picture. But at the core of all this, the thing that we found to be most important was the idea that, as I said earlier, there is a flow of work. And when we looked at this space, there was a particularly old paradigm, if you will. There was never the thought that all of those people who were providing youth sports automation systems thought of it as automation. They thought of it as, I'm going to do registration, I'm going to do tournaments, I'm going to do scheduling, pieces of the full equation, and we chose to look at it as a complete flow of work. The other thing we noticed was that there was a lot of old tools, a lot of old technology, and it was fragmented with no one thinking through the process of a youth sports club or a youth soccer club is just a flow of work from the time someone hits your website until they actually have their kids registered and they're going to play. And we found old technology, particularly in the area of databases, multiple databases that accomplished, a stovepipe piece of the work, one that registered kids, one that registered coaches, one that did scheduling, so multiple databases. And the other thing we noticed in that old paradigm were all of the stakeholders' needs were not addressed, particularly when it came to the player and the parents. We connected at the club level, we connected at the team level, but we didn't do a good job of connecting club, team, and players and parents. We chose to address this through, thinking about it from a new paradigm or new perspective, and that the idea that there is, as is the case in most industries, the sense of automation, a full integrated flow of automation. So we kind of looked at youth sports automation as a market in and of itself. And when you look at it that way, the first thing you do is look at a flow of work. Again, from the time someone gets to a website until they actually have their kids registered, onto a team, scheduled, playing, and then being communicated with by not only the club, but their team, and then the other people that are associated with that team. And again, to that backdrop, when you understand the flow of work, which we will talk about today, then there are processes that support each of those steps in that flow of work. And we aspired, in the sense of a new paradigm, to make sure everything was integrated from start to finish. It was easy to use. It was all safe. And as you probably all know, in today's ever-increasing social world, we really need to make sure that we are protecting the safety, particularly of the kids, not only their information, but their ability to communicate and be communicated with. And then the other thing that, certainly is a hallmark of this new paradigm is everything is going mobile, regardless of whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. So from day one, you need to start thinking about building and optimizing for mobile. And then the ability to take advantage of remarkably good technology in the area of databases, the whole concept of cloud computing, and then software tools, most of which sit in the public domain, things like Google Search and Google Maps and things like that. And then you can't look at this paradigm of thinking without also understanding what the connection is to social media outlets and as well different means of communicating. So there is a complete new paradigm that when we thought about this space, we considered. The other thing that was interesting for us is, as is typical for all of us as parents with kids, there are a tremendous amount of new bearing influences on our kids and therefore on all of us as families. Nike, ESPN, Facebook, EA Sports, Apple, Xbox, all bring a different dimension to the world that our kids are living in, and therefore we as parents and family members are living in. So those bearing influences were things that we took into consideration in our thinking. And then when we finally got to looking at it, we decided that there needed to be that sense of one for all, a truly integrated place where a youth soccer club, all of their teams, all of their coaches and team managers, and all of their parents and players could be united. Clubs, teams, players, and families and fans. So the concept of one for all led us to think about, the sense that there has to be a unified solution. So while we built Choreo around this notion, it really was more us being inspired by the idea that there could be, much like the case in every other large IT-driven system, an integrated system that was based on the flow of work that occurs in a natural, soccer club, or if you're in a manufacturing facility on a job shop floor, or even if you're building a welfare system, it is clearly and purely a flow of work. And then we wanted to make sure that we took advantage of, all of those cloud-based platform tools and databases and things like that, which we had in, 30-plus years of our careers, and understanding how to apply them in an intelligent way. So when you think about workflow, we actually laid this all out and realized that any soccer club starts from the perspective that someone new is moving into the community and they want to learn about their club. And hopefully once they've learned about that club via a really rich and intuitively built website, you get to thinking about that club. And we looked at websites not only from the club's perspective, but also from the idea that if your club has a website, each team should have a web presence that subordinates itself to the club's website, yet carries forward the ability to post news about the team, the ability to post information about that team, most importantly, to carry the brand of the team forward. So for us, the workflow starts with the website, then it goes to programs that team or clubs look at and consider, most important of which is the type of soccer you offer, and it can go beyond soccer to be adult programs or clinics, camps, any of those kind of programs that you would offer at your club level, and then the ability, once you've been able to describe that program, to register into it. Once that registration is complete, you go through that flow of work that says we form teams, and from those teams we manage those rosters, and once those rosters are managed, we actually then integrate scheduling as the next step in what occurs. And then there is certainly a back office amount of work that goes on in the area of operations, financials, and reporting. And then finally, it manifests itself with the ability for the clubs and or the teams to communicate, deal with alerts, and then present dashboards for people to manage their sporting life with inside that club that they're part of and that team that they're part of. And then finally, you get to the whole experience that families and teams kind of have in an integrated flow of work. So let me start to break down some of how we look at these things. As I said earlier, the first thing that a club wants to do is establish the identity of their club and the brand of their club in a way that is easy to understand and a way that is consistent as someone works their way through that whole website experience. So what we looked at was the most basic of things. What was the web technology that was in place? And the old paradigm was page builder systems. The new paradigm is to view things through a rich set of content management tools where someone who doesn't have a particularly large amount of website experience can actually manage a website given a template and a good rich set of current and contemporary tools. So we wanted to make sure that that was all modular and template-based. We wanted to make sure, and most importantly, that this was optimized for mobile. When we looked at a lot of websites that were built with some of the other tools that were available, we found that when you went to that mobile version of it, the navigation wasn't in sync with the size and shape and look of an iPhone or a Droid or a Microsoft phone or something like that. So it was really important for us from the beginning to look at the websites through the idea of wanting to make sure that they were optimized for mobile use. And really what we thought about was, what do we expect parents and players to be using the phone for? To check schedules, to make adjustments to schedules and things like that. Then the other thing about websites that was important was to make sure that a club was able to clearly identify their brand and then drive that brand consistently down to each team page or team website and then down to the individual dashboards that everybody would have access to and be using. And then the final piece for us in thinking through websites was to make sure that it supported all the classic social media tools like Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, and things like that. So the beginning of that workflow process is certainly the websites, and it's important to note that those websites are clubs and teams both. Then once someone has gotten to your site and decided that your club is the right place for their kids to be playing soccer, we wanted to make sure that that registration process was intelligent. It opened programs that were easy for people to understand and intuitive to use. And the most important element that we found to be missing, yet important in applying levels of new technology, was to make sure we had a dynamic database. And in almost every instance we found in older systems and in the systems that clubs were using, and in fact, to be quite candid, the systems that the clubs where our kids played were using were very old tiered database structures done with flat files and in some level of hierarchy. So we built a unique relational database where the primary role in that database was that of the player, and then we defined all the relationships around that player: coach, team manager, club officials, parents, fans, and things like that. Once the database is really contemporary with the needs of any youth soccer organization, then the next thing was to make sure that there was a lot of flexibility in the registration process. And when we captured information, we captured it one time. We made sure that the relevant information, things like demographics and important information that would be used repeatedly, was stored in a way that was easy to access and easy to reuse. So we found a lot of places in this flow of work, particularly when it came to programs and registrations, that once you organized the database correctly, you were in much better shape. And then once you have a bunch of kids who've registered into a program, regardless of whether it's rec soccer, travel soccer, premier soccer, supervised soccer, you could do team formation. And one of the things that we noticed most particularly about, if you will, the old paradigm of team formation was you were locked into a certain way of doing things, and we learned that you really needed to, in that team formation process as a club, make sure that you found a system that allowed team formation to be driven by the needs of your club. For instance, did you allow rec teams to roll over from one year to the next? Did you allow the search criteria that drove how you formed teams at your club level to allow you to search on those things that were important for you in forming those teams? And the other thing was the idea of virtual objects. You will find that in integration, and particularly in IT integration, the use of virtual objects. And a virtual object can be anything from a team that is reconstituted year over year or season over season, needs to be more virtual than it is standard and locked in. So there's a lot of areas in the process of looking at workflow and applying workflow process and new technologies where you can make team formation a lot easier and a lot simpler, which obviously lessens the burden on your admins. And then once you formed those teams, now you have active rosters. And the responsibility we noticed when we really did some workflow and work study on this, the relationship with that player and that parent now switched from the club to the team. And they needed to actually start managing rosters more from the team's perspective. So it could be anything from an active game day roster to an out-of-state travel roster to, a roster that had guest players playing on it and things like that. So there had to be a lot of flexibility in these rosters, yet throughout the whole process of that, you really needed to make sure that there was a level of real-time compliance with your state association, with U.S. Youth Soccer, with any of those governance organizations that might govern a tournament, a league, or something like that. So the ability to have access to real-time compliance tools done not through paper, but through the actual flow of work in your automation system was important. And the other thing that we noticed was sorely missing was the ability to store relevant documents. And when someone would access a document, be it a waiver that they needed to sign, you wanted to have the opportunity to store that document itself, be able to put it into the flow of registering for any program, but more importantly, be able to date and timestamp when someone signed that document and then notify that player or that parent when their period of being covered by that waiver was about to expire. So the whole idea of managing rosters allowed us to take advantage of just a lot of really good, new, fresh technology, a lot of which actually sits in the public domain and was given to us like organizations like Yahoo and Google and organizations like that. So then once you move from the management of that roster, probably one of the most complicated things that really needed to be addressed in the whole idea of having an integrated system was the need to do scheduling. Because if you think about it, your kids and you as parents were excited about the opportunity to play youth soccer. They went and they registered. They found themselves on a team. They had an active roster, and they were able to communicate through that roster. But the real conundrum was, so now how do we know where we're supposed to go and where we're supposed to play? Imagine that conversation between a parent or a kid, like, when do you guys practice, or when did your game, and are you in this league? That whole scheduling conundrum was pretty fascinating for us, particularly when you think about all of the software and all of the tools that are available. So we actually approached this from a reverse order. So one of those areas within workflow where when we actually looked at scheduling, we kind of did it backwards, and we looked at what do these calendars look like, and how do we make sure that whatever calendar a club or a team presents to their parents, players, and coaches and team managers, it had to be in a common format that would allow you to integrate it into other calendaring systems, because no vendor that services a soccer club nor any soccer club would want to build a one-off calendaring system. So we had to make sure that it was able to integrate into Outlook, iCal, whatever the Google systems are, and things like that. And once we had solved that dilemma, the next thing that we noticed was there are so many multiple sources and formats for schedules to be imported and exported. So you might have one league that uses a particular format. It might be an Excel export, or you might have another league that uses a different format. So the ability to have and be able to manage a robust level of source and formats was important, particularly as it related to importing and exporting. For instance, you might be working with a league that imports into a certain format, yet you have to export into some referee system that is in a different format. So the second thing, we looked at was, that rich and very robust need to be able to use multiple import-export sources and formats. And then you finally got to the heart and soul of, the real scheduling conundrum, which was building that algorithm that allowed you to take into consideration time, the who, and the place. And as you probably all well know, you can take a full-size soccer field and reconfigure it for, 3 teams practicing on it, 4 teams practicing on it. You can take that same field and on a weekend configure it for a small-sided game. So there's a lot of dynamics that come into play when you build a really rich algorithm that allows you to go through a set of decisions that generate a practice schedule, which is the easiest of the schedules to generate, and then a slightly more complicated, league schedule where it's an internal league and you're not being influenced by teams that are coming in from outside your league. So, the idea of building that dynamic algorithm was a pretty important step for us, but very important in that integrated flow of work. And then we took kind of a pause and said, at some point you have to really make sure that the operational side of the club, the operations, the financials, and all of those reports that the admins are using to support, the relationship with the families and the parents and the players was in place. So we looked at, how do you integrate all of the work that you do into some financial management tool? How do you look at all those operational reports? And what we found was, the ability to create quick reports and reuse reports and to be able to save a report that you can refresh with current information was really important. And probably most importantly, we wanted to create dynamic libraries for common information. And that takes you right back to that very relational database that, allows you to do things, particularly in the area of, operations and finance and reports. It was a very, very important element of that single integrated flow of work that, we looked at. Then we got back to, now that we've got kids scheduled and we know where they're going and, we have them on teams and things like that, we got to the whole idea of how do you communicate with and alert and use these really, what we think are pretty unique tools, and that's the sense of a dashboard. And when we got to this element of it, we knew that there were a tremendous amount of communication tools out there. Everything from simple email to internal email to bulk email to just a variety of tools that Google would allow you access to, Yahoo would allow you access to, and even when you dug more deeply into things like robocalls, where you can alert people, based on a simple message that goes out with an urgency tag on it that allows everybody who has given us how they individually want to be communicated with when there's an alert that says the game's been postponed, the game's been moved, or something like that. And then we got to this idea of a sense of a dashboard. And it was really tempting for, us to look at those dashboards only through the eyes of Facebook or, one of those more robust social media tools. And we chose not to do that. We chose to create a dashboard that would be really cordoned off, if you will, at the team level, yet allowing the club to be able to communicate information down, but really protecting the privacy of those kids and those parents and those coaches and team managers. So, we did create a dashboard where you can certainly manage a schedule very productively, both on a routine basis and at a last-minute or alerting basis. We allowed those dashboards to allow internal communication, and I emphasize the word internal because we did want to protect the privacy of kids, parents, players, families, and things like that. And we wanted to allow it to be a place where kids could share, commentary, could share photos, could share information and things like that. So that kind of the dashboard kind of ties you all the way back to the actual club website itself, and it results in an environment where families and teams can thrive. And it does create a sense of social community for youth sports, but again, in the early days of Choreo, and even when we were thinking this flow of work through, people were immediately jumping to the conclusion that we were creating a Facebook for youth sports. And while we have certain elements of a social community, we really have been very, very careful about privacy. And you will note that, one of the things where we hold a lot of our intellectual property and several patents is around the privacy engine, where we work really hard to make sure that, we protect that information that is so important to the parent, the player, and ultimately the club. And when you do it right, and we think that we have done that with these dashboards, it allows the club to be better connected to the members and the teams to be better connected, and it really does allow us to focus on privacy. And finally, so I would take a pause here and just say, so we looked at the whole youth sports world, and in particular youth soccer, which is where we have really focused, as a flow of work. From the time you hit that website, as you go through that whole flow of work till you're actively on a team and your dashboards are alive, and you can look at workflow. Then at each step along the way, you can look at those processes that take place during that flow of work. And this is typically how things are done in any, IT integration business. You'll find your bigger consulting firms do this kind of thing. But then they underpin all of that with the best technology that is available. And we don't burden clubs with the idea of really getting deeply into the technology. We tend to want to take all of the experience that we have and apply the best and most contemporary technology to making sure that that flow of work and those processes are best enabled. And it does begin with a relational database, and we hold 3 patents around our database, and it really is the starting point for everything that we do. And then you want to think about what that communication layer is that you want to use. And as I said earlier, it starts with all of the basic email tools, but there's a lot of things that you can do, for instance, with intelligent search that enable a much quicker, more efficient way to communicate. And certainly you want to be very, very mindful of mobile. And when we were thinking about Choreo, we spent a lot of time researching the proliferation of mobile devices and where they're trending, certainly at the iPhone level, but also from Microsoft's perspective and Google's perspective and everybody else. And I'm sure I don't need to spend a lot of time telling you about where that's all heading. And then the other thing that was really amazing to us was very few platforms were taking advantage of open source software in a way that was integrated. We found other platforms kind of bolting things on and adding certain open source things, but no one looked at it from an integrated point of view, where you took open source search software and built it into the fabric of your integrated system. We just didn't see a lot of people doing that. And there is tremendous open source software out there that you can tap into, which we think the people that we're dealing with, as the demographic changes and younger families are entering the youth sports world, they are much more savvy with these open source software tools than some of us folks who've been around a little bit longer are. And then finally, we did take some cues from the social media world when we thought about the idea of a Facebook dashboard or a Pinterest dashboard or things like that. But again, we wanted to be very careful and very mindful of, while we presented information in an intelligent way and in a way that made it fun, we also wanted to make sure that it was completely safe and very private to what it was that they were doing. So, and plus something I should comment on before I go one step further is the whole idea of cloud computing. When we looked at Choreo, we actually looked at 3 large data centers: a Lockheed Martin data center, an Amazon data center, and an IBM data center. And the idea of computing in the cloud allows a lot more assurance that you're going to have good uptime performance, assurance that your firewalls and the security of your data is going to be well taken care of. And the whole idea of operating in the cloud just dismisses that, concern about operations and data and efficiency, and we actually operate Choreo out of an Amazon data center back in Northern Virginia. So when you're all done, if you think about workflow as your fundamental tenet, and you underpin that with good processes and good application of IT resources and technology, you can connect the soccer world, and in fact you can connect any youth sports world, because we are thinking constantly about how the state impacts youth soccer, how U.S. youth soccer impacts youth soccer, what role in that data schema, even the NSCAA standards project can play, being mindful that there are clubs and associations and finally, families and players. And that is our aspiration, to make sure that, we've built a system that allows relational databases or a relational database and all the right tools to connect all of these worlds in a seamless and fully integrated way. And that is the aspiration of where Choreo is and where we're attempting to go.